Good afternoon. Welcome to today's Team Kentucky Update. I'm Andy. We have a number of different topics to cover, some exciting news to start. As we build on the record economic momentum that has been established over the past 2 years, I'm very happy to share that we are off and running in 2023. Exciting new companies continue to invest in Kentucky and to choose Kentucky for some of the largest investments in their history. As we bring January to a close, private sector new location and expansion announcement for the month have totaled more than $500 million in new investments and nearly 600 new full-time jobs. That is a fantastic start to 2023 as we come off the best 2-year period for economic development in our history. So today I want to highlight several companies growing in our state, and I'll start with a couple of projects that we announced earlier this week. We are seeing continued growth of our thriving manufacturing sector with White Drive Motors and Steering. The $16 million investment from White is creating 25 new full-time jobs in Christian County. White is a member of the Interpump Group, a global business specialized in hydraulic fluid power and high-pressure pumps. White itself is a manufacturer of hydraulic motors specifically for tractors and lifts. This project is moving production of a gear set known as the heart of the unit here to Kentucky, bringing the company's current production operations from Germany to Hopkinsville. The project includes nearly 13,000 square feet of expansion to an existing 124,000 square foot facility. I'd like to thank White Drive Motors and Steering for expanding its presence in the Commonwealth, and we look forward to your continued success in Hopkinsville. Next up, Water Solutions Unlimited is a producer of non-hazardous chemicals needed to combat dirty water and corrosion. Leaders at WSU are investing $3 million in a new Grayson County facility and creating 8 full-time in-person jobs and 4 remote positions. The company is constructing a new facility in Litchfield to increase capacity to blend and manufacture chemicals. WSU was founded in 1987, working with blended phosphates, and in 1990s began blending its own. In the 2000s, the company started working with municipalities to meet EPA-mandated limits on disinfection products used in water systems. This company has shown tremendous growth over the years and will be a welcome addition to the Grayson County area. I want to thank leaders at WSU for putting their trust in Kentucky and investing in the Litchfield community. I'm also thrilled to share news of a few ribbon cuttings in recent days in Northern Kentucky. We love all of the announcements, but the announcement is hope. The groundbreaking is work. The ribbon cuttings are reality. That's when the operations have started and the jobs are there. Northern Kentucky continues to grow at an incredible rate, and this week just shows what a great job they're doing. So last week, Sigma Network, a food provider and delivery service, cut the ribbon on the company's new 330,000 square foot location in Burlington. Sigma leaders are creating an amazing 150 new full-time jobs for Northern Kentucky residents. Sigma Network was formed by Cisco in 1985 to specialize in service of restaurant chains. 25 years later, Sigma is one of the largest food service distributors in the United States. So I want to thank Sigma and Cisco for investing in Kentucky's thriving food, beverage, and agri-tech sector, and for the job creation that is coming to Northern Kentucky. On Tuesday, I had the pleasure of joining leaders at Ankara Cargo to cut the ribbon on the company's newly renovated headquarters in Hebron. Ankara makes those ties you see on tractor trailers that hold the load to the trailer itself, as well as some of the chains and other equipment that is inside of the trailer. They are making an $8 million investment, creating 50 full-time jobs. This is their headquarters there in Northern Kentucky. The space consolidates multiple manufacturing and warehousing locations under one roof. It contains a dedicated multimedia resource center, a photo lab, a soundproof studio for shooting videos and broadcasting content. Ankara has already been a great employer. This keeps the jobs we had in Northern Kentucky and adds even more. Finally, I want to highlight yet another ribbon-cutting event in Northern Kentucky as leaders from Whitehorse Freight celebrated an exciting next step for their company on Tuesday. Whitehorse Freight will be increasing its distribution and logistics presence in the Commonwealth with a $5.4 million investment that creates an incredible 400 new full-time jobs. The investment comes in response to rapid growth and increased customer demand that includes the purchase of an existing 51,000 square foot building to increase their operations and overall office space. It is no secret that Kentucky is in an ideal location. That's what makes us a logistics leader. Our proximity to resources and our great workforce continue to grow our logistics sector and is one of many reasons that people are picking Kentucky. I want to thank Whitehorse. 400 new full-time jobs are going to be 400 families that have the security of knowing how they put food on the table and hopefully more opportunities for their kids and for their grandkids. All right, yesterday we also got some great news for our Eastern Kentucky families. Good news in our fight to get those that have been addicted or harmed in the opioid epidemic better, and good job news as well. Addiction Recovery Care, or ARC, closed on the purchase of Bellefonte Hospital in Greenup County. ARC is a national leader in treatment and recovery. I actually believe the facility that we opened on what used to be St. Catherine's College may be the largest residential treatment facility in the United States that's also run by ARC. But at this site, at what used to be Bellefonte, they will create a new comprehensive treatment facility that will offer life-saving treatment and recovery services for those struggling with addiction, as well as provide mental health support. And even better, this is going to create 200 new quality jobs for folks that work at this center. The facility is going to transform lives for the better. It takes a lot of courage and bravery to take the steps to overcome addiction and live that better life, to do work to defeat an adversary that most of us can't even imagine how difficult it must be. And we want to make sure there's every single support out there for people who make that step and want to try to get better. And whether it's their first or second or third or fourth or fifth time going into treatment, listen, as long as you're trying, we are so supportive. We want you to get better. Get back with your family. There should be no judgment and no stigma. I want to thank Tim Robinson. Tim Robinson is the executive director of ARC, and he has done so much to expand treatment and recovery options all across Kentucky. It's Tim who's told me that he believes Kentucky is now number one per capita in treatment beds in the country for helping those suffering from addiction. All right, in economic development related news, also infrastructure news. High-speed, reliable internet, we know, is not just the infrastructure of the future, it's the infrastructure of the present. It's just as important right now as roads or bridges. Better internet is a key part of our plan to build a better Kentucky, and it'll be critical to the success of our state's economy and to future job creation. Healthcare, jobs, education, and entertainment now rely, at least in part, on high-speed internet, so everybody needs it. Many of our areas in the state have been overlooked in the past when it comes to internet. So let me be clear. This administration believes every home, every business needs to have affordable, accessible, high-speed internet, and our goal is to get it to all of them. This summer, I announced the largest public sector investment in Kentucky's history in expanding broadband. That's going to provide high-speed internet access to more than 34,000 Kentucky families that don't currently have it in 36 separate counties. We have a second round that's out right now. Again, those were ARPA funds, but a third round of money is coming in. We announced that last week when the U.S. Department of Treasury approved our plan to invest $182 million. And the best part is to invest it through the existing program where we're already deploying these other dollars. This third round of funding is going to support access for 45,000 Kentucky households and businesses. So the first, 34,000. The second, we're still waiting for the bids to come back. The third, 45,000. Today, we have even more good news as we work to improve internet access across the state. On Monday, Simmons College received $2.7 million in federal grant funding to build a digital teaching and learning center that's going to serve students, faculty, and the surrounding community. This amazing center is going to include hardware, mobile hotspots, training, professional development, and in-person assistance. It will include support for students who take online classes, and it's going to include an outreach service program where student interns can help other people in the community learn computer and phone skills. That will make it easier for them to stay in touch with their families, talk to their doctors, and stay informed. It's primarily going to be aimed at seniors in the surrounding community around Simmons. This project will also share high-speed internet access with 2 local neighborhoods through partnerships with the Family Life Center and the Louisville Central Community Center. Simmons College students will have better and faster internet as they work towards their degree. They'll have a dedicated space to learn more about digital skills and technology. And best of all, they're sharing all of that, the Learning Center and the high-speed internet itself, with their neighbors to help lift others up through education. That is the Team Kentucky spirit in action. And while we're making significant progress on funding high-speed internet, we can't afford to leave one person or one community behind. So today, I'm announcing a 14-stop, 6-week listening tour so we can hear directly from leaders in education, healthcare, and agriculture, along with community partners, business owners, and residents to help us identify precisely where more work needs to be done. This tour will be led by our Office of Broadband Development as we create a state broadband plan that ensures investments are made where they are critically needed. And to do that, that we listen in each of these communities. Joining the tour will also be representatives from the Education and Labor Cabinet who want to hear directly from citizens and businesses from Mayfield to Maysville, Hopkinsville to Hazard, and many stops in between as we develop a digital equity plan that'll finally bridge the gap in access that has existed for far too long. The listening tour kicks off Tuesday, February 14th in Hopkinsville, and will conclude Tuesday, March 23rd in Florence. You can see a full list of the tour stops and register to attend the one nearest to you by visiting broadband.ky.gov. That's broadband.ky.gov. In more good news for our Kentucky families and communities, yesterday, the U.S. Department of Transportation announced that Kentucky will receive $25 million as part of the federal Safe Streets and Roads for All grant program. The program is designed to improve safety for drivers and pedestrians across the country by providing funding to build safer roads, sidewalks, and crosswalks. The funding awarded to Kentucky will go towards improving roads that currently pose safety risk in communities across the Commonwealth that include Louisville, Ashland, Corbin, Danville, and Elizabethtown. As governor, the safety of our people is one of my top priorities. And you got to provide that safety in a number of different ways. Repairing, changing dangerous roads, putting crosswalks like one we announced last year that we're putting in at an Oldham County school where so many students cross that road and need that crosswalk for safety is one way that we provide that safety for our people. So I look forward to seeing the positive impact that these federal funds will have. All right, an update on flooding and flooding recovery in Eastern Kentucky. First, the sad news from earlier this week is that our death toll has now risen to 45. That now includes Vanessa Baker of Breathitt County, who's been missing since the flooding occurred in July. We were able to add Miss Baker to this list because a judge ruled in Breathitt County that she'd now be considered deceased for purposes of starting the probate. I've talked to a member of Miss Baker's family. It's been several weeks, maybe a month. And I know how hard this is on them. They were an incredibly close family, and I know they still lack closure from not having found her body. I hope that this step, one that they chose to take, brings at least a little bit of peace, and I certainly hope that this is the last time we'll have to update those numbers. FEMA update. So far, FEMA has paid out more than $97.4 million. That is a $580,000 increase from last week. And every week, I'm talking about what the increase is because people are still getting dollars, and it's really important that they continue to pursue their claim. First couple weeks, we announced it was about 600,000 and a little more. Last week, it was over $1 million. This week, 580,000. So do not give up. Since January 25th, an additional 13 applicants have received the maximum grant of $37,900. So if you need help, please call FEMA directly or visit a multi-agency resource center. Commonwealth Sheltering Program, if we can put that up, 226 households in travel trailers. It's down 9 from last week. I'm now confident to say we have crested in this sheltering program. We have probably seen the largest number of residents in that sheltering program that we will. As we saw in the West, people begin to transition out as they find more permanent housing, as we build more permanent housing, as we repair more houses. I think we've got 9 fewer households in travel trailers from last week. And again, that's almost always for good reasons. We're down to just 4 pending households that want to get in to one of these travel trailers. That is also good news. Kentucky State Parks now down to sheltering 24 people. Those that are able to move to a travel trailer when one is available are required to, with a few exceptions of folks who have different health reasons that may prevent that. Team Eastern Kentucky Flood Relief Fund, 41,500 plus donations, $13.1 million. We've dispersed $4.4 million. First, we paid for every funeral, and we'll have one more now to pay for. And then over $4 million in $500 checks to survivors approved for any amount of FEMA. We've also committed an additional $800,000 for building new homes and home repair, and believe the remainder of the fund will be used to help build homes in these higher ground communities. We've announced the acquisition of 2 different pieces of land, one in Knott and one in Perry County, to do that. Today, I'm announcing additional SAFE Fund awards from both the Eastern Kentucky and Western Kentucky SAFE Funds. From Eastern Kentucky, it is $1.9 million. That includes $250,000 to the city of Jackson to fund a long-term recovery plan. It includes more than $1.5 million to Letcher County Fiscal Court to fund a FEMA match, and $150,000 to the village of Buckhorn for equipment and recovery efforts. In the Western Kentucky SAFE Fund, today we're announcing $375,000 is going to the Marshall County Fiscal Court to help ease the fiscal strain of FEMA and eligible reimbursement. So as we have now seen from the Western Kentucky SAFE Fund, and as we can see in the Eastern Kentucky SAFE Fund, it takes a little bit of time for the communities to submit what they need, and each community is going to submit time after time after time after time. So when we look, especially at the Eastern Kentucky SAFE Fund, it's not going to be enough. We're going to spend everything in it. We believe that we have over $1 billion in water and wastewater damage alone, but it's going to take time for the engineering, for the plans to have what the community needs to submit for that ultimate reimbursement. And we'll be paying out of the Western Kentucky SAFE Fund, I believe, for at least the next year, as the recovery, again, on the infrastructure side especially, simply takes time. All right, an update on the Department of Juvenile Justice. As we've been discussing for the last several months, this administration is taking strong and quick action to make our juvenile detention centers safer for the staff and for the youth. Let me provide just a little bit of context. We have the slide of the overall DJJ operations, don't we? DJJ is a very large operation that provides a lot of different services in a lot of different contexts. That's everything from youth development centers, group homes, day treatment centers. We provide both pre-adjudication, before somebody has been found guilty or innocent, detention. We also provide post-adjudication detention, and those are in the regional juvenile detention centers. What we've been talking about these last several months is the pre-adjudication regional juvenile detention centers. I just want to make sure because if you look at the overall number of DJJ employees, a whole lot are in these 3 other areas. So just to provide a little bit of context. The second piece of context is a lot of the services that are provided to our youth are provided post adjudication or in one of these other centers. And the reason is there are certain limitations to somebody who is still going to stand trial about what you can talk to them about or what their attorneys will let you talk to them about, as they still have those constitutional rights as they head towards trial. So, steps we've taken thus far. At my direction, DJJ opened the first female-only detention center in Campbell County in December. For the first time, male juveniles are now separated by security level based on the severity of their offense. Those charged with serious offenses are housed in one of 3 high-security detention centers, which are in Adair, Fayette, and Warren counties. Male juveniles younger than 14 who've been charged with a lower-level offense are at Boyd, Breathitt, Jefferson, and McCracken. We've ensured now that a 17-year-old youth who is charged with capital murder is not in the same building or sitting right next to a 13-year-old charged with contempt of court for truancy. These changes have made our juvenile detention centers safer for the staff and for the youth. While we have had a couple of recent incidents in Warren County, both were resolved ultimately before law enforcement had to step in. We see the system beginning to work better in these higher security facilities. With that said, we're working to expand the DJJ transportation branch to help relieve our law enforcement and their concerns, and it's a real concern. If you've got to drive a female juvenile 2.5 hours to drop them off. Now, we had to go ahead and make that change to better protect those youth, but we are working to alleviate those law enforcement concerns. We've also collaborated with the Kentucky State Police and Department of Corrections to enhance security in the centers. We've provided compensation enhancements to help DJJ better recruit and retain staff. With last week's announcement that we were raising pay to $50,000, we've now gone from when I came in as governor, where it was about $30,000 to $50,000, which I believe is the same thing that Fayette County just announced they were going to try to begin their jail staff and others at. By the way, this $50,000 number is pretty close to what our Department of Corrections folks, security folks, start at. They're close to. We actually want to raise that to $50,000 too. And we'll be asking the General Assembly to do that. But we have seen improvement in our numbers in the Department of Corrections when we got closer to that $50,000 mark. We saw fewer people leaving, and the hiring has started to pick up. We're making substantial improvements to the physical facilities and their design to enhance security. For the first time, we're making defensive equipment available to DJJ youth workers. We're training DJJ staff on the use of that equipment and on the identification of threat groups within the detention centers. We've hired a director of security who brings deep experience in operating secure facilities. That is Larry Chandler, former Department of Corrections warden. Right now, he is evaluating each of the facilities and providing feedback on security upgrades. We're creating a compliance division to ensure the best practices are identified and followed. We're reorganizing the department by function to better manage the current challenges facing detention facilities. We're creating a robust transportation unit we talked about. We're procuring equipment and training personnel to better prevent the introduction of contraband into the facilities. We're making or requesting a wide array of legislative, regulatory, and policy changes. We're going to have John Hicks talk about a few of our budget requests that we made earlier this week. We're rationalizing the detention footprint for 2 new state-of-the-art facilities. And last week, I announced that the Jefferson Juvenile Detention Center will reopen and begin accepting a limited number of male juveniles who have been ordered into secure detention. Today, I'm also announced that KSP will be placed at all 3 high security facilities until their staffing and training reaches a level where it is not necessary. Those facilities, again, are Adair, Fayette, and Warren. There will be a presence, my understanding, 24/7 until we reach the point where the training and the personnel have reached a safer letter. We're going to be asking lawmakers to support both the changes that we have made, I believe we have to act, not study. We have to stop the disruptions now. We have to provide a safe environment today, not next year. So, with that, I want to invite Executive Cabinet Secretary and State Budget Director John Hicks up to talk about a very specific list of needs that we provided based on a request to give the legislature everything we think it would take to make sure that these can be safe and secure facilities. And that's exactly what we're doing.
Thank you, Governor. I want to mention a couple of things. There are two things that we can ask the General Assembly to do to help advance the improvements in the juvenile justice and particularly the detention center system. That is to modify statutes and appropriate funds. Those are two things the executive branch cannot do. And so today we were asked by the Juvenile Justice Work Group to provide information, and we came over and did a presentation that included some of what because they asked, what do you need? And so I'm going to go through some of the funding requests that we've come up with to extend and improve the announcements and actions we've already taken. Get the slide up. Thank you. So first, let me start with the operating budget. The governor announced that we were raising minimum pay for detention center staff to $50,000. We were able to finance that in the current year because we have so many vacant positions. But in order to sustain that into the future, we need an additional amount of funds in the next fiscal year. That's $3.2 million. The governor's also mentioned the expansion of the transportation function within the juvenile detention system so that we can mitigate the impact on law enforcement as they have to currently transport youth across the state. And so we want to stand up the additional staff, vehicles, and equipment necessary to take over that function so that local law enforcement are not having to spend that time. That's going to take about $5.8 million in the next fiscal year. Then one of the basic reasons we're trying to raise pay in the detention center is because we need to increase the number of staff to secure and provide the appropriate services to the youth that are detained in the detention center. So that's a very significant issue. It's been the problems that we've had have been resulting in many cases due to the lower level of staffing in those facilities. And so 11.6 million would be the annualized value of hiring the additional staff that the department, along with their superintendents and along with one of our director of security, have come up with a staffing pattern that is sufficient to maintain and secure these facilities. So that's a very significant effort. And the idea of raising the pay is, we think, going to attract the additional staff as well as some of the security improvements that we've been making. The governor talked about the appearances and the location of the state police 24/7 in our 3 high security facilities, and the training and the defensive equipment to create the situation where that is an attractive position for someone to come into. And we're hopeful that those actions will enable us to hire more staff. Since the governor made the announcement last week about the $50,000, we're starting to see some interest in various parts of the state in terms of more applications. Lastly, in the youth of the operating budget, the Department of Juvenile Justice really doesn't have a robust youth offender management system like we do have in the Department of Corrections. And so we're using federal funds this year to basically hook onto the Department of Corrections system, obtain the necessary software and program to convert it and use it in our juvenile justice system. And there's an ongoing price of using that software, and we're asking for resources in order to improve that system as well. Let me move over to the capital budget. There are a number of items here that are really dedicated to improvement of the security of the physical plant of the detention centers. First is a perimeter fencing for detention centers. We do not have that in great place in these 8 detention centers. And we want to put that in all cases in all 8 of those facilities. Same with security posts. By that, I mean the physical entrance that a vehicle comes into as they approach each of our detention centers. We need improvements there to ensure safety and security, and also to enable the examination of potential contraband that could be brought into the facility. we've got a number of interior security improvements that our new director of security and the superintendents have identified that will really assist in the operations within the facility. And so we've got a pot of funds to improve those within the facilities. Fourthly, there is an improvement to the juvenile detention center in Jefferson County. And by that, I'm speaking about the Linden facility that the governor said we're going to open 10 beds, the 10-bed unit here soon. That's intended to get to the low-level security offenders, not the high-level security offenders. And so there are going to be physical improvements to that facility, because we have a lot of those units that are not now open that aren't what we call as wet cells. They're not full cells where you have water, toilet, sink, etc. And so we want to, which is something we need in all of our detention centers. Lastly is, we know that we may have a need for additional facilities. You've heard plenty of discussion in the Louisville area about having one in that area that would be sufficient to secure high-level offenders, high-risk offenders there. That's something we're considering talking about, working with Metro government. We'll be working with the legislature on the discussion of that. And there's and another facility that we're considering, one of which is perhaps a more central location for the female-only detention center, because we're utilizing Campbell County because it was available and fit our needs, but again, not necessarily centrally located. But those are two items that we're going to have further discussions with the legislature on. And then lastly, let me pivot. We have staffing issues in our adult correctional institutions across the state, and we are converting the youth workers in our juvenile detention centers to correctional officers. And so we also want the correctional officers in our adult correctional institutions, for purposes of pay. That is the underlying reason. And we also want to be able to improve the staffing at our adult correctional institutions. And we want to raise the minimum salary for adult correctional officers to $50,000, similar to what we're doing now in juvenile detention. And as the governor mentioned, election Fayette Urban County government announced they're raising their minimum pay within their jail to $50,000. We have looked at a lot of the data around what is the appropriate pay for security positions in both the juvenile and adult institutions. And Kentucky is ranked very low among the states that we have found in terms of our minimum salaries for correctional officers. And we have attempted marginal improvements over the last 3 years. The governor had instituted a 10% salary increase for both corrections and juvenile justice workers in December of 21. The General Assembly did an across-the-board increase of 8% for the current fiscal year. The governor had announced the other juvenile detention increases up to $50,000 just recently. So we believe that that's certainly one element, but an important element of attracting sufficient employees in these, public safety positions that we need critically. Thank you, Governor.
So I'd add two quick notes. The reclassification, as John was talking about it, do not make these individuals employees of the Department of Corrections. What it does is allow us to provide a higher level of pay that is currently available to those that fall within that classification. They still work for DJJ. Second is, we've already announced that at the end of this 2-year budget, we're going to have $2 billion in revenue above and beyond what our expenses are. So we have a $2 billion surplus, and these are the dollars that we're asking for as a comparison to address these issues, not just now, but to get these facilities where they need to be, get the staffing where they need to be. I mean, we've been talking about insufficient pay and insufficient staffing since at least 2017, when there was a terrible incident in Elizabethtown. And so when you look at where DJJ is right now, all three branches of government have some ownership of it. And we have district judges that are still sending truants to detention facilities, which they shouldn't go there. A judge shouldn't be sending an individual for that type of issue. The executive branch, we operate these. So we have ownership. And the legislative branch, even after the 2017 incident, hasn't. provided raises in 2017 and 2018 and 2019. Didn't do the ones we put in the 2020 budget. So what we're asking is that everybody do their part, all three branches of government. Let's not try to beat each other up over this. Let's fix it. That's exactly what I'm trying to do, and I've asked this administration to do. So we'll also be asking lawmakers to make two additional steps under statute. One is to allow public offenders, these youth offenders, to qualify for bail as set by the detaining court, which is what adults can get, but the youth cannot. And second, by statute, remove status offenders and folks who are charged with a Class B misdemeanor from detention. So we're asking the state legislature to say that a judge cannot send someone to detention if all they're charged with is a status offense, such as a violation of court order or a Class B misdemeanor. All right, the next piece is one that I've had an opportunity only at a couple of gaggles to talk about, but it's going to be really important. It's upcoming. This is really early, so we're going to be rolling out a lot more information. But it's one where we need everybody who's impacted to hear about it, which means government, community organizations, and we need the press's help to get out the word. What we're talking about is the pandemic Medicaid unwind. So with the national state of emergency coming to an end, and also with that last bill that passed Congress right at the end of last year that had some pieces in it, there's a number of programs that are going to end, and funding for virtually all of the programs are going to end. I'll get there in a second. Our state of emergency in Kentucky has been over since March of 2022. I vetoed that because basically all it did was prevent us from getting extra food assistance for people who are hungry at a time when food has cost more than ever. It was $50+ million that we lost that would have helped people who struggle to put food on the table, put it on the table. But as the national public health emergency comes to an end, there's going to be a number of programs like our rental assistance program that come to an end. That rental assistance program is almost out of money. And all of these programs were intended to get people through this height of COVID and not to be permanent. But one of the biggest challenges is unwinding pandemic Medicaid. So given that we were facing a pandemic, we wanted everybody to have healthcare coverage. It's the federal government under both administrations. And so what they did is they provided an easy way to sign up for Medicaid. I think it was a one-page form, which was wonderful for people. And what that did is it made it really easy once we identified people who didn't have healthcare coverage to get them on it. And that helped with vaccination programs, testing, and ensuring that everybody could go see a doctor when they needed to. Now, that pandemic Medicaid is going to unwind. People cannot stay on it. And we're talking about 240,000 Kentuckians, we believe. That is a rough number who signed up for Medicaid during the pandemic. Again, getting them signed up was absolutely crucial. We wanted to make it as easy as possible. So those who are on pandemic Medicaid will qualify for one of three potential, we can call them buckets. I don't want to say options because you probably qualify for one and not the other two. And so what we'll need to be doing, and this is really between March and June, which I'll talk about in a minute, is ensuring, what we want to ensure is that all 260,000 Kentuckians that are impacted, and we believe we might be able to help some of them automatically, and I'll talk about that in a second, and we might have more time on some of them. But generally, we need to transition about 260,000 Kentuckians who are on pandemic Medicaid to one of these three buckets. So first, a lot of people will qualify for regular Medicaid, but they didn't do the full sign up for it. They did the one-page sign up for it. And so what we have to do is get them fully through the system and qualified. We have some hopes that we might be able to do this automatically, but right now that is not an option. And so we are planning on reaching out, and we'll talk a little bit about how to do that, but more will come later on getting folks there. Now, there are people who signed up for pandemic Medicaid that might have qualified for Medicare, but the federal government said, let's make sure they're covered. Go ahead. There are some who have then aged into Medicare that since the pandemic started. And the final is anybody who doesn't qualify for regular Medicaid or Medicare should qualify for one of the plans on our state-based exchange called Connect, and they will very likely qualify for significant subsidies. So the major effort will begin March 1st for most Kentuckians and April 1st for a few others. The period of the sign-up will go for the ones that get the March notification from March to May, which is about a typical time period for enrollment. And then the following month, we'll have one additional month. There's going to be a number of different ways, and we are still finalizing plans to help people. First, everybody on pandemic Medicaid is covered by an MCO. And the MCO will be communicating directly to these individuals in the way that the managed care organization does right now. Second, we have a number of connectors. And third, insurance agents have a chance to be really helpful. So on Connect, which are the private sector plans, a person who uses an insurance agent to figure out which one they need, the insurance company that they're placed with actually pays the agent. So neither the person who's transitioning nor the state end up paying for that. We are going to have a lot more information to come. I'm intentionally flagging this as early as I can because we want as many people out there to know as we're creating a portal to help, as they will be hearing from their MCO that this is a big job. And it's one we've been planning on for many months, and it's one that we will continue to refine our planning. We are also reaching out to as many different groups as possible. I was on with the Council of Churches this morning talking specifically about this. We want every major community organization, which will be sending them information, to be having discussions if they believe that any of their membership might fall within the population that is on pandemic Medicaid. So much more to come, but flagging this very, very early. Public health update. Flu is continuing to decline, which is wonderful, but it is still really, really high. The flu shot is very effective versus this version of the flu. Please get the flu shot. You can get it if you are 6 months of age or older. You can find a location at vaccines.gov. On COVID, we'll put up our map, which I think Saul will put up this time. I believe this is a little bit better than last week, but again, we're kind of fluctuating up and down a little bit week to week on cases and on the positivity rate. Hospitalizations remain low, but folks, COVID's still out there. We still lose typically 40 plus people a week. So please, if you haven't gotten vaccinated or boosted, please consider it. Also, now's the time if you've been waiting, because when the federal public health emergency ends, you may be in a position where there's a copay for your vaccine, depending on how you're covered, testing, treatment, all that's going to fall however other things are handled under your private insurance or under Medicaid. The government has done a whole lot and put a whole lot of dollars in to make sure almost every treatment and or vaccine, prevention, and the rest was fully covered. And that will not necessarily be the case as we move forward. Now would be the time. If you want to purchase more at-home tests, just remember there is an expiration date. Finally, our team Kentucky All-Star, and then we'll open it up to questions, is former DuPont Manual High School track and field and cross-country runner Yared Nagus, who set a new U.S. record Friday night. He now holds the record for the indoor 3,000 meter. His time shattered the previous record that had stood for 10 years. That's a pretty big deal. It stood for a decade. Yared has made all of Kentucky proud, and we can't wait to see what he accomplishes next. He is our team Kentucky All-Star. All right, I think we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 journalists here and 3 on the line, so this may take a little bit of time. Olivia, can we start with you?
Earlier today, the Juvenile Justice Work Group said the change of leadership at the Department for Juvenile Justice is needed.
Well, I'm received a briefing on that hearing, and I think some said that, and then I think another said, but the commissioner has changed so much, and that might be a challenge. My goal is to get this fixed, and I want somebody who is completely vested in getting it fixed. The current commissioner came from outside of the system, had worked in the system in the past, but was in the private sector or working for other nonprofits. What I have seen of our current commissioner is she wants to make these changes. She wants to make these facilities safe, and we're going to ensure that the resources and the opportunities are there. Phil.
Also on juvenile justice, they're talking about a lot of these offenders being violent and very just out of control. Do you think that some of these problems have a root problem that go back to the home setting? Is there something that could be done within the homes to prevent these kids from even committing crimes to begin with?
So when we've talked about those we're housing in the juvenile justice system, we're not trying to make any statement on overall youth in Kentucky or in America. But what we see is over time a major change in the violence level of the youth inside the detention facilities. And a lot of that has to do with good legislation in the past that removed a number of people that were otherwise going in. And so in many ways, the mix, when you look by offense level, has changed. When we were housing somebody who was accused of capital murder, which with somebody who's in for a status offense, and this had been done all 20 years that it's operated, I think you have something very different. I think you have one person that if they think they're going to be convicted is going to go from DJJ to prison and probably can't see far enough into the future where there is anything else. And you have somebody else who probably wants the services and to get out as quickly as they can. Well, there's no disincentive in many ways at disruption for the person that doesn't see that future, and it impacts the other individual as well. I mean, when you look at the seriousness of the crimes that people are charged with, it's very significant. I think there's also a gang element that we have seen that creates violence because of the different factions. I think when the reports come out, we'll have seen that in Adair County. So I'm not trying to talk about youth as a whole, but certainly the makeup inside the facilities has been more violent, and we've seen that. Right? I understand people can talk about the conditions, and we always need to make conditions better, but I never want to excuse a violent act. I never want to give an excuse to somebody who significantly beats and hurts a DJJ official, just like we would never want to make an excuse the other way either. Liam.
Governor, my question is related to the Team Western Kentucky Tornado Relief Fund, specifically the $12 million that was given to address individual unmet needs for tornado survivors in collaboration with long-term recovery groups. So the recent Kentucky Lantern reporting that we've done has shown months of delays and frustrations in getting the money out the door to survivors. These long-term recovery groups say that the rules that were set on this money were too restrictive or unreasonable. And, and a little more than 90% of that 12 million is unspent as of mid-January. I wanted to ask you, what would you say to the tornado survivor who's maybe heard in the past that, their long-term recovery group received hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions of dollars and hasn't seen the results of that yet?
Now, what I'd tell that survivor first is we've gotten direct payments out to them multiple times because our number one objective and what Team Western Kentucky Tornado Relief Fund was to help them and to help them directly. And the tornado survivors I've talked to would rather get that money directly and decide how they need to spend it based on their biggest needs versus it coming through another organization. The second thing I'd say is payments went to pay for every funeral, which I think we all agree we've got to grieve together. If that tornado survivor is a small family farmer, they've received aid because the Mayfield Granary was destroyed, and it helped them get through that time. If they're still looking for long-term housing, that fund is going to build 300 new homes in the area, which is very important. And on the long-term recovery groups, we've seen very different results. We've got a couple counties that have spent it all and that we're able to follow the same rules and regulations that we put out there. The rules that we've put out there that some have pushed back against are based on a couple of things. Number one, we promised that this money would go directly to tornado survivors and not to any overhead. So providing just a block with maximum flexibility to at least one of the groups that has paid staff, we can't guarantee that. Second, we have set an amount per tornado survivor to ensure that it's not just first come, first serve, and that everybody who's going to these groups can get some level of help. We've had some issues with groups that wanted a larger amount and held all the applications, hoping that a larger account would come. Obviously, we wish that that hadn't been the case. But this is a $52 million fund that wouldn't have otherwise existed. This is $52 million of aid, even if it takes a little longer through one part. It's really helping people. This is the generosity of so many people across the country, and it's done really good work. I like the long-term recovery groups. We want to work with them. We want to work through it all. But I certainly think that if you look at a couple of the counties, they've shown that you can get these dollars out the door. Last thing I'd mention is when we put together the EREG in the first time, the state treasurer came back with comments and said that she was concerned about it going to a nonprofit group and not coming directly from us. And so part of these rules were based on trying to satisfy that concern that she raised. All right, that was longer than Bodie.
Thank you,
Oh,
Governor.
I've got you on.
I wanted to go back to the conversation on DJJ and the press conference that was held this morning. The lawmakers on that work group called the actions taken by the administration short-term solutions, the separating of females, separating juveniles based on how high their offense was, and also funding these pay raises using the money that's budgeted for vacant positions. So I'm curious if you have a response to that, what you see as long-term solutions. I know you made some statute recommendations here today, but I'm curious if there's more work there to be done.
Well, I think everybody in the broader context of DJJ, and not just these pre-adjudication facilities, would like to work together to improve as many of the outcomes as possible. We talk a lot about early intervention. It would be great to reach these youth that are ultimately being charged with significant crimes before that happens. But let me mention a couple things we've done that shouldn't be short term. Number one, separating females from males. Adair County is our most secure facility, and still we saw something terrible happen there. People are housed there in different wings that are shut down and locked down, and still you saw something there. I would never want to house females with males again, because when we fully separate them, we ensure that at least what we believe happened in Adair County doesn't happen ever again. Second, the same thing that we saw there suggests that if you house all level of classifications in the same place, you allow for a disruption of services to everybody, right? Even with improved security, we are still, at least from time to time, going to have one of these individuals that engages in violence or in disruption. We hope that it could be immediately resolved, but we've got to resolve it in a way that's safe for everybody. And so that's still likely a lockdown until it can be resolved in one of these facilities. So if you put everybody back in the same place, first, we haven't learned from what's happened. And second, it's going to make it harder for parents to visit. And third, what it's going to mean is likely everyone's going to have an experience that is more like the highest level of security, which certainly those with misdemeanors and status offenses that are currently in there, they don't need to have that level of experience. But you heard that from some of the members of the work group. You've also heard people disagree on the floor of the legislature. And while that work group was going on, we were also getting requests to testify from regular sitting committees as well. And we did our best to work with each of them, trying to prioritize those that held their meetings open to the public and to the press, which is the way you're supposed to do it. Megan.
Hello, yes, I'm asking this ahead of your presentation with the Heart Association. So
Yes.
in light of the Damar Hamlin scare, we've been catching up with Kentucky families who have lost kids to cardiac episodes.
Yeah.
Malcolm and Jean in 2020 in Boone County, Star Facho in 2017. There are no state laws in Kentucky requiring AEDs to be at sporting events. They're
Right.
just recommended. And just yesterday, we spoke with Star Facho's mom, and she said she wants to see that change. She wants to see these emergency plans, executed better. She wants to see AEDs everywhere and for everybody in schools to know how to use them. So,
Yeah.
what's your response to that?
I think it's a good idea. And especially when a mom who's lost a child comes to you and says, I think this will prevent this from happening in the future. It's something we've got to really strongly consider. In your question, you mentioned not just sporting events, but schools. And we would want to make sure that, especially everywhere that our kids are, that we would have the equipment and the training if the worst of the worst happened. And I think that goes to both this and to CPR and even giving blood from time to time to ensure that the supply is there. And while the issue with the Buffalo Bills player, and we're grateful that he is getting better, is so public, I think you rightfully point out a lot of parents have had outcomes that weren't like his and are still grieving. And so for them, I think looking at it is really important. Divya, and then John.
So on the subject of juvenile justice, I know that I think everybody can agree that a lot of these kids also have behavioral health issues.
Yes.
And we're seeing a lot of money focused on building these facilities, security, but part of the focus on safety doesn't seem to include resources, mental health wise, both for workers and for these kids, because they come from pretty traumatic environments themselves. Why aren't we having that in this conversation around safety and more appropriations?
So first, our staff does have access to a state mental health. I'm going to call it a group, but it's not. It's a plan that we all can use. It's similar to what our Kentucky State Police and other have when they've gone through a traumatic incident. Now, we're looking at what else we can provide. The biggest challenge, which I think you know too, are people who've been through a lot, who because of stigma or others don't necessarily take advantage of what's in front of them, that we still have too many people that don't hear out loud it's okay not to be okay. And so we certainly hope our workers who have been through different things and we refer them there, take advantage of those services. And we should always see what else is available. And certainly we want the very best in behavioral services for individuals. When we looked at the overall DJJ map, those services are there. Most of them are provided post adjudication. And so I just want to say one challenge is a lot of these juveniles are represented by counsel who don't want them talking to a counselor about the incident that landed them in the DJJ detention because their trial is still coming up. And so we can and should provide the services that we can. There is a challenge there just in where it is in the judicial process. Now, one thing we can do to change a lot of that is we could have a mandated time period that judicial process has to be resolved by, right? Some of these folks may be in pre-adjudication for years, some only weeks. And one way to address that, and whether it's judges do it by themselves or it could be done by statute, is having a clock that runs. And I know some crimes are more challenging for that. Charges, but it's certainly one way that we could get people through that first part where that is a barrier and into areas where we can provide more of those services. John.
Thank you. Apart from the leadership changes, the work group this morning talked about the need for an outside review. They said that there's just cultural problems at some of these detention facilities that they predate you and Vicki Reed and Kerry Harvey. And they said at this point there needs to be some sort of outside trustee that can come in, inspect the places, talk to employees freely. And they say some employees don't feel free to talk right now. And just do a performance audit and say, here are the cultural issues at the Department of Juvenile Justice that are flawed and that need to be fixed. Would you support or oppose this? How would we get this going if you're okay with it?
So a performance audit, or at least overall review, was done in 2017. It provided recommendations. It talked about staffing levels. It talked about the need to pay more. And what we saw while the Bevan administration made a small change is session after session after session of the General Assembly, there was no action taken there. I'm all for an outside audit that could come in and give us good information if done the right way, in a non-political way, in a way that could help the system do better. We're always open to that. But what we have to commit to if we're going to do that is actually take some of the actions to address the challenges that it brings forth, and not just to have it, to say it, and then session after session after session, it not be acted upon. McKenna.
Thank you. This is also about the work group. One of the things that they mentioned in their unmet needs that they saw, or recommendations that they saw, was unfettered access to cabinet and department officials and rank and file employees free of intimidation from the governor's office officials. Do you agree with that assessment, or how would you characterize
No. The work group has tried to challenge how cooperative our administration has been. Let's talk about the work group, right? It wasn't legally authorized, but that's fine. We'd still work with it. But it met behind closed doors. Wouldn't let you in, the press. It wouldn't let the public in. And then what they requested was to have certain employees walk into a room, close it, no recording, no one else there with them. It's just not reasonable. And if we tried to act that way in the executive branch, it'd violate the Open Meetings Act. We go and we testify in front of numerous open committees, and we even worked with this group. But you know, it even started out when we sent the highest appointed official in our cabinet, John Hicks, who has the longest historical knowledge on this and the rest, and is our budget director, to be able to talk about that over, and was told he couldn't come in the room. Now, we ultimately resolved that. But what it meant is we lost out on an opportunity to brief legislators, which we were going to, about that last round of changes before we made them. So listen, we want to cooperate. We're willing to cooperate. We have sent our very top officials that can get things done over to have very candid conversations. But this ought to be done in the open. It ought to be done open to press and to public. Listen, I'm taking questions right here and have on this. That's my commitment to fixing it. Okay, on the line, Tom Latek.
Thank you, Governor, and good afternoon. State Auditor Mike Harmon says he has been getting requests to audit the Western Kentucky Relief Fund for the tornado victims. And I was wondering if you had been taking part in any of those discussions and what your thoughts were on about him considering or possibly performing a performance audit of.
Well, so first, every payment and every decision is entirely public. So you know, you wouldn't audit the funerals; those are ones that are paid for. If what he is talking about are individuals that we sent checks to, each one of those individuals was verified by FEMA as somebody that went through their system, and that they deemed to be a tornado survivor, and that they spent government funds to, or were deemed by a private insurer to be insured, and those funds are paid out to. The only way you would audit that is to audit FEMA or to audit the private insurers, because we didn't want to have to spend millions of dollars doing another verification on the other side of FEMA. And doing so would run really contrary to what a lot of us believe, is that the FEMA process is already too tough. You look at what you have to go to get through it. Look at how people in Eastern Kentucky have been treated. Right now, we believe the error rate on the second round of checks is at 2%. And overall for the fund, that would be 0.3%. That's better than just about any federal government program that I've ever heard of. Melissa Patrick, Kentucky Health News.
Hi, Governor. I guess I'm wanting to just get your take on whether you agree or disagree with President Biden's decision to end the public health emergency. But for Kentuckians in particular, what will that mean to all of the data collection that we've been doing? Will we still keep track of that, or will it be time to end it?
Melissa, that is a really good question on data collection. I know, I at least believe some of that is supported by federal dollars. So let me ask DPH and we'll get back to you. It will be a challenge to continue activities that were funded by the federal government if no funding is provided. I don't know that that's the case here. Certainly what it'll mean to Kentuckians is they might see charges for tests, hopefully not for vaccines and for treatments. That's going to be a big change from where we've been. Certainly, we have programs that are ending. The pandemic Medicaid unwind, though that was ordered by a bill at the end of last year. But I think it's time. I think it's time. We are in a much different and a much better place with the pandemic. People have the information they need, and everyone has the ability to protect themselves to the best of their ability through a series of steps. And finally, Mark Payne.
Thanks, Governor. You were in Northern Kentucky over the past week a few times. Did you meet with any Northern Kentucky University officials to discuss the university's budget deficit or the sudden departure of former President Videa? If so, can you share any of those details?
I did not. I did, however, attend an NKU basketball game and met the interim president, but did not have any conversations on either of those two issues. All right. Thank you all. This has been a long one. We'll be back next Thursday.